Chapter 3, The Sapling, Part 1. The northern gateway had survived worse storms than this. A stone structure will not stand at the edge of the sea for 700 years without facing its fair share of gales. But this storm was different, not in its strength, but in its solemn mood. Each flash of lightning painted the gateway not the blue-gray of the stones with which it was made, but the bleach white of a skull that peered morosely down upon the clashing sea 100 yards below. The middle arch was the tallest, a colossal doorway that divided the ocean on one side from a great expanse of grasslands on the other. Second and third arches buttressed outward in either direction, a family of doors linked together along the perimeter of the cliff. The shortest of these could fit 2 upright elephants standing one on the other, but the message was clear from a distance, engraved above the highest arch: "All are welcome." Perched just above this friendly pronouncement, the weasel picked at a tooth with his tongue. It was a nervous tick that came back to him at moments like this, moments with such intentions. He didn't like it. It made him feel weak to have any sign of nerves. Fortunately, the habit had not resurfaced until now that he was in charge and, so long as everything went as smoothly as he'd promised, he need not fear for his life. He had positioned his men above the gateway's lesser arches, too far below to scrutinize his demeanor. These guys didn't know him. They had no idea that he was shivering with chill and nerves, no idea that he knew to his very core that he was in far over his head. From the distance they stood, spread out like candles upon the lower tiers. All they would be able to see was the silhouette of their leader pressed against flashes of lightning in the black sky. He smiled faintly at the thought and licked his sharp teeth again. His eyes scanned the sea far below. He grabbed at his wrist with a soaking paw and thumbed a button along the rim of the watch. It glowed pale blue. 5:16 a.m. Could this take any longer? He dropped his arms and cocked his head sideways, staring down at the train track that rose out of the ocean and plateaued beneath the highest arch. A flicker caught his peripheral again. All 4s these guys were stupid. He blinked his flashlight back, then to the other side, just to be sure everyone got the same message. Not yet. The seconds dragged on, and Frank McGovern wondered if that fish train would ever arrive. He licked his teeth. The luggage car rocked gently sideways, and Jack Roberts opened his eyes. He'd dreamed he was in the belly of a giant fish, swimming lazily through the sea. A nauseousness still bubbled up his chest. The faint odor of seawater still hung in the air. In the soft red glow of a single light caged just above the intercar door, he watched a row of suspended backpacks and garment bags click against the metal wall as they swung loosely. The train was in motion. As the drowsiness ebbed away, he took in the rest of the room. The center floor was made of a single sheet of metal, brown by intention, but balding bronze at the center and near the loading and intercar doors. High up along the loading door, a long and slender window showed nothing but blackness. He watched for a moment, drawn to what he assumed was the night sky. Then something zipped past. Motionless, he waited, and after a moment, it reappeared. It looked like a large bronze sheet whisking past the window. No, whisking toward the window, covering it completely, then fading outward again. After several more passes, he noticed something else. Bubbles. They swirled in the wake of the whisking object, running along its edges. Some even clung to the window. Elation coursed through him as he realized what it was. An artificial fish fin propelling the train through water. He threw his bare feet over the edge of the shelf and dropped down, then selected a sturdy-looking suitcase and dragged it over the edge. With great effort, he pulled it across the metal floor and propped it upright beneath the window. But he was disappointed. Beyond the enormous mechanical fin, it was simply too dark to make out anything but particles that glistened red in the window light. The car began to bank right, so that Jack had to lean against the door. To his left, he could now see golden windows glowing along the rest of the train as it curved. His vision was blocked momentarily as the fin pushed backward. When it drew away, he saw something else. Beyond the train, far ahead, 2 rows of ghostly green lamps swooped downward on either side of what looked like an unfinished roller coaster track. As the train drew nearer, pointing itself toward the lights, the swooping shape left his field of view, and the train righted itself. After a moment, there was a heavy grind, both heard and felt. It rattled through the luggage car, dimly at first. Then, with a sudden click, the car's motion became rigid, as though it had locked into something. Tracks! They had reached the other side of the sea. As if in confirmation, a voice echoed through the baggage car.
Welcome to Northern Nicatia. We're now passing below the Northern Gateway. The ramp can be a bit steep, so please remain seated as we surface.
The water's ceiling drew nearer, a thundercloud of waves into which the train was being drawn. The tinkering patter of rain began to tap menacingly at the roof. A moment later, the baggage car reached the top of the slope, plateauing. It passed below the Northern Gateway, of which Jack only caught a gray flash, and trundled into the vast bastion plains of Northern Nicatia. Seeing nothing but his own reflection staring back at him, slightly blurred in the double pane, he used his sleeve to wipe away the heart-shaped fog his breath had formed, and cupped his paws around his peripherals. This was only marginally better. A black plain stretched out into a black mountain range, silhouetted against a faint gray sky. Morning was approaching. Deciding that weeds and desert brush were the best he'd see, he moved back with a sigh. He blinked. Something had been moving alongside the train. Once more, he pressed his face to the window. A pickup truck sped past the window, kicking up pebbles that tinkled against the luggage car. The brakes eased, and the truck began keeping pace with the train. In the bed stood 4 figures, hanging onto the sides as the truck bounced alongside the track. The nearest of these figures was just below Jack's eye level. He had a bald head with pointed ears. His brows were thick and bushy, and wrapped around a pair of goggles supported by a broad, flat snout. The rider turned his head quickly upward, and Jack ducked, nearly toppling off of the suitcase. After a moment he stood cautiously, pressed his forehead against the glass, and cupped the sides of his face. This time he did topple off of the suitcase. A pig's face had been level with his own, looking straight in at him. He scrambled to hide beneath the door. His face next to the suitcase, Jack saw something he hadn't noticed before. A small gold plate was fixed near the handle, engraved with the letters EW. A pair of slender paws seized him at both arms. He felt himself being pulled backward, and in his panic he let out a shrill cry. "A stowaway, have we?" a mountain twang voice said as Jack was turned around to face a squirrel in a grayish-blue attendant suit. "I'm afraid I'll have to take you to the captain." Disoriented, Jack began to ramble hysterically. "Pig!" he screamed, pointing toward the window. "He's getting on the train!" He continued to struggle as the attendant gripped his wrist and pulled him through the intercar doors. As they entered the rearmost passenger car, sleeping patrons began to stir, looking around to see what all the commotion was about. The attendant seemed to notice, or perhaps he simply realized how little hope there was in dragging a grade school bunny several more cars to the engine. Relenting, he adopted a reasoned tone. "All right, listen, you. Sapley Station is more than 20 minutes off. Supposing there was someone trying to board the train, wouldn't you want to tell the captain?" Jack paused, breathing heavily. In his panic, he hadn't thought about what to do, but realization dawned on him. This was a submersible train, and it was heading toward Sapley. "EW!" he blurted excitedly. "We have to tell Dr. Walraven!" He turned toward the front of the train and bolted off. "Dr. Walraven!" Jack yelled as he entered the next car, nearly tripping over a white wolf at the doorway. The doctor, who had been staring thoughtfully out the window, sat upright, his eyebrows raised in surprise. "Jack?" he said as the bunny bounded into the seat next to him. Alan, the fox boy, sat across from the doctor, his feet propped up on the seat Jack now occupied. He jerked a foot angrily from beneath the bunny, grumbling as he shut his eyes. "How did you get on this train?" Dr. Walraven asked. The squirrel, out of breath, jogged up the aisle. "I'm sorry, sir, I found him stowed away in the baggage car." "Is that right?" Dr. Walraven asked, eyeing Jack. "Well, I'll be interested to know why," he said, giving the bunny a stern yet not unkindly look. He turned back to the attendant. "Thank you, young man. I'll square away with the line when we get to Sapley." "Dr. Walraven!" Jack burst out. "There was somebody outside. He was a pig. He looked right at me, and then that guy grabbed me, and I thought he was the pig, so I hit him. He deserved it anyway, because you should never grab someone from behind." To which the squirrel rolled his eyes. "The pig was getting on the train." Dr. Walraven looked inquiringly at the squirrel, who shook his head. "I didn't see anything, sir." A pair of elderly goats had awakened and were watching the discussion with groggy trepidation. Dr. Walraven turned to see that most of the passengers around them were watching as well. "May we speak with the captain?" he asked. "I knew you'd believe me," Jack said, throwing a disdainful look at the squirrel. "Certainly, sir," the attendant said, gesturing with an open paw toward the front of the train. Dr. Walraven hoisted Jack to the aisle and stood to follow. He paused, turning to Alan, whose eyes were still closed. The fox folded his arms across his chest and made a salivating movement with his mouth. Dr. Walraven turned back toward the attendant, nodding forward, and they moved on. After several more cars, they entered a hot, loud room bathed in red light. At the far end of the room was a riveted steel door. The squirrel, who had introduced himself as Nathan, had to shout as he led the two passengers along. "The captain is right through here," he said, lifting a metal handle. At the front of the engine, two figures stood before the rain-pummeled windshield, contrasted against the beam of the headlamp. "Sir," Nathan started, "this is Dr. Walraven, a passenger, and this is Jack. He thinks—" He paused awkwardly. "He thinks he saw someone boarding the train." The squirrel fell silent as the shorter of the two figures turned around, revealing a sharp-toothed grin. A tongue picked momentarily at the teeth. Nathan leapt back in surprise. Under the white captain's cap, the shifty eyes of a weasel turned down to Jack. "You say you saw someone?" the weasel hissed as he leaned closer to Jack, who pressed into the doctor's legs. Jack whimpered, his voice soft and unsure. "Yes, it was a pig. He was ugly." The weasel stood, his eyes half-lidded and his crooked lips turned up into a sneer. "An ugly pig," he repeated. "Was he as ugly as this pig?" He motioned to the other figure, who stepped from the dark to reveal yellow tusks and bushy eyebrows. Jack cried out as he pressed harder into the doctor's legs. Putting an arm over the boy, Dr. Walraven started. "Now wait just one—" "That's not the captain," Nathan whispered. Dr. Walraven looked to the attendant, then back to the thugs. "I'm afraid the captain had to step out," the weasel said with a self-satisfied laugh.
"More like fly out."
The pig chortled, but caught the unamused eye of the weasel and stopped short.
"You can join him," the weasel said. "Toss them over the side."
He turned again toward the windshield, then paused.
"Wait," he said. "Give me the canister first."
"Maybe we should use them,"
the pig started, shrugging off the shoulder strap of a silver cylinder that resembled an over-large thermos.
"You know, as bait."
The weasel took the canister, fixing his co-conspirator with a cold glare. The pig huffed and threw his belly at the group, shoving them toward the door. The red walls and overwhelming heat of the engine room put Jack in mind of hell. It was easy enough to picture this bloated pig in a tight red suit and cape, horns, pitchfork, and all. Slender fingers gripped the bunny's shoulders.
"It's going to be okay, Jack," Dr. Walraven whispered.
"Keep moving,"
the pig said. As they neared the rear of the car, he forced a sudden turn, and they found themselves standing at a metal door with a porthole window. Nothing but blackness beyond sideways streaks of rain. He yanked Jack upward by his ears. The doctor made a grab for him, but the enormous pig slapped him to the floor.
"End of the line, you runt,"
the pig said. Without another word, he tore open the door and tossed Jack into the howling rain.